welcome to episode 4 of Cyber from the Frontlines. I'm your host, Arun Variku, and I'm joined today with Yelisey Bohuslavskiy, who is the co-founder and the chief research officer of RedSense, and also previously was the co-founder for another intelligence firm named AdvIntel. Glad to have you on this podcast, Yelisey.
Thank you so much for inviting.
Thank you for being here. Really excited to have this conversation with you. Great. So today we are going to talk about essentially the story of the week, the successful takedown of Lockbit infrastructure, and which they call Operation Kronos, and then we'll also talk about the impact it will have on the global ransomware threat landscape as well. So. Yeah. To begin with, if you want to give a background about yourself, we can start with that. And then.
Yes. So my name is Yelisey. I am a ransomware researcher and a co-founder at the cybersecurity startup RedSense. I have been investigating ransomware groups since their very beginning in their new form. So since 2018, and particularly for Lockbit, I've been following them from 2021.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, and Lockbit is really, has been a pain for
yes.
So let's begin with understanding Lockbit itself, the background, and essentially how Lockbit operates. Just to give some perspective to our viewers, Lockbit is one of the most notorious ransomware groups out there. And if I see the numbers, Lockbit claimed more than 2,300 victims worldwide and extorted over more than 120 million in payments as well. So pretty large in scale and scope out there. So just to understand, just from your perspective, if you can give us the history behind Lockbit, how it started, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Arun. That's actually a really good start, because to understand what happened with the takedown and to understand what will follow the takedown, Lockbit is one of those groups where it's really important to understand how they transformed through time. And I will go like all the way back to 2019, even though I promised to be fast. In 2019, when ransomware became this like new big thing in cybersecurity and dominated cybercrime and cybersecurity as well, especially on the Russian-speaking side, what was the critical change in that year were two things. First, ransomware groups began to steal data and put them on their blogs. This would be very important for our story. And the second thing was that they introduced this so-called ransomware as a service model, when you basically have a bunch of people who are absolutely random, who don't know each other. They don't need to have any particular skill, any particular talent. You give them the access to the form of your locker, not a source code, just a version of your locker, and you give them access to the panel. Like pretty much anyone could have joined Lockbit at that point. And it wasn't only about Lockbit. It was pretty much of all the groups that existed at that point. And this was an extremely successful model, because you say have 100 people, let's say 90 of them will not be able to commit a network infiltration and execute the locker or steal the data. The remaining 10 will. And just by using this spray and pray, en masse approach, they were able to be really successful. And that was the first part of Lockbit, one of the oldest groups in this entire cybercrime line. And then we have 2021. And this is where things really get very interesting and very critical for Lockbit and for cybercrime in general. 2021 was actually the end of ransomware as a service model, because by 2021, it already existed for 2 years. And it started to backfire. So first of all, a lot of companies started to put proper defenses, and a lot of affiliates were not able to bypass them. Like when they were looking at the networks that don't have like 1, 2, 3, 4 password for an RDP, they were not able to understand what to do. But that was like not even the main thing. The main thing was that when you have a bunch of people, random people that you don't know, they start to do really strange things that you cannot control. And the critical thing was that these people in Arrival, in Avedon, in Maze, in Lockbit, they began to attack targets that shouldn't be attacked. Some of those targets were in Russia, some of those targets were in China, some of those targets were in Iran, but most importantly, some of those targets were in America, and they were political, like the law firm that was affiliated with, at that point, President Donald Trump, or the Colonial Pipeline, or Kaseya, the MSP provider, and the attack happened on July 4th, and Arrival made a huge deal out of that. And for the Russian government, where, like, in Russia was a jurisdiction where most of those people were situated, Belarus as well, and like Belarus was, it still is, we're allied with Russia. For the Russian government, any political statement that is done not within its rank is considered a huge deal. So they were already annoyed that someone is making a political statement. But then what happened was the Colonial Pipeline and other high-profile attacks, they preceded the Putin-Biden summit in June 2021. And keep in mind, at that point, Russian tanks are at the Ukrainian border. Putin is going to the summit as this strong man, thinking of pretty much twisting Biden's hands and, you know, getting some additional, traction and movement in U.S., NATO, and Russian relationship. And he's trying to hold the West hostage by putting his tanks on the Ukrainian border. And at this point, all this high-profile attack happened, and Biden is basically saying, well, Ukraine is an important case, but you need to do something about your ransomware actors operating through your territory. And you can imagine Putin going back home being absolutely furious because he wants to talk about Ukraine. He doesn't want to talk about Arrival. He doesn't want to talk about Avedon. He doesn't want to talk about Lockbit. And this is when the model, the ransomware as a service model, just collapses entirely. First of all, a lot of affiliates just become scared and they quit. Those who don't quit, they start to get huge problems with the Russian government. This is exactly when the government started the first wave of crackdowns. Avedon was the first victim, then it was Arrival. And somewhere at this point, we see a very interesting story with Lockbit. Suddenly, this guy, Lockbit Support, becomes extremely active, and he will be a main character in our story. At the same time, the initial access brokers, who kind of, like, I wouldn't say they operate behind the curtains, but they're not really visible because they don't need to. These are the people who use botnets, primarily Stealer botnets, to exfiltrate credentials cookies that are then suitable for network access. So they don't really need a lot of noise. They're quiet people, and they're working directly with the Lockbit admin. So the admin is the person who pretty much developed the locker. So, like, in general, you can think about that person as a mastermind. So they start suddenly report across their chatter that the Lockbit admin is missing, and only the Lockbit support is the one they could talk to. And obviously, they don't want to talk to a support. Like, you know, if you're signing a deal with someone, and essentially initial access brokerage, that's a supply chain thing. It's a sell and purchase thing. So if you want to sign the deal with someone as a company, let's say, and you're referred to the tech desk or support desk, you won't be happy. So the initial access brokers are not happy. In their chatter, we are seeing that they're starting to try to figure out where is the admin. The admin is missing. Then the admin is back. And a lot of the long-term initial access brokers who were there since like 2017, 2016, back when those accesses were sold not for ransomware, but for like other purposes, mostly fraud. So they're saying that it's a different person just by the way they operate. And they have this begin to suspect that that person is someone who is implanted by the Russian security services, which in general, we would think of just like a conspiracy theory or suspicion. But if we're looking at what is going on with the rest of cybercrime operating from Russia at this point, this actually makes perfect sense. And this is really when Lockbit gets to a new level. Like, obviously, even by that point, it was a very formidable group. But that the success they had at that point were achieved through just having a large number of people. Now they will be successful because they would be going for what's called big game hunting, and they would be employing targeted, very high-profile attacks on one hand, and on the other hand, they will be doing cyber vandalism. So basically, they will go into a company network, very peripheral network, like, take data that is available somewhere like on Zoom info that doesn't cost anything, but they will put this data, sometimes like 40 gigabytes, sometimes even the data is fake. They will put this data under the name of the company on their blog, And this way, they will be creating a lot of noise and a lot of movement around their brand. So, like, one of the core things about Lockbit is they did employ really good branding strategy. And Lockbit support, Lockbit sub, was actually the critical person in employing the strategy because they were all over forums. They were posting. They were talking to journalists all the time here in the United States, in other countries. They were engaging with researchers. They were engaging with other people on dark web forums. And as a result, Lockbit was just 24/7 in the news. Everything related to Lockbit, something happens related to Lockbit, it will be on the first line of the Google News. And that was really important for the other folks who are doing this big game hunting attacks, because when they hack someone and they are able to exfiltrate really important data. So they will go to the victim and they will say like, hey, you will be on our blog. And they're like, who are you? And the group will be, well, the negotiator will be, we're Lockbit. So the victim will Google Lockbit and immediately it's all over the news. So they would be really impacted by this heat that was created by Lockbit sub. And that's when the second arm of Lockbit comes into play. That's the admin, possibly, I would even say probably, indeed implanted by the Russian security services. This has been a case for many other instances.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that I wanted to chat with you was, does Lockbit have ties with the Russian state? So great, go ahead.
No, I'll get there in a second. It's kind of like even more interesting than it is superficially. So he understands that now he needs to pretty much feed these shoes that they created with this heat around the block. And what this person begins to do, they begin leveraging all the connections with high-profile groups. And high-profile groups at that point are the groups that survived the collapse of ransomware as a service models. And they're very different from ransomware as a service. They're this traditional cybercrime corporate entity, basically a corporation, which is bad, to put it very simply. The epitome of that was obviously Conti, but Hive was very close to that. They started as a ransomware as a service model, then they moved into this corporate-like form, and they survived for quite a while. Black Cat was in a way like that. It wasn't as corporate as Conti. It was small, but the people within Black Cat knew each other very well. And even though they did have affiliates, those affiliates, they had personal offline connections with the head of Black Cat. So it wasn't corporate, but it wasn't ransomware as a service model as well. And somewhere in 2021, we were able to see that Lockbit is engaging with Conti. And essentially, for the next 2 years, basically, what would happen is Conti actors would engage with Lockbit. Conti actors would be providing them, or post-Conti, when Conti dissolved and became like several groups, they would be providing them pretty much with their expertise. So the main group here is Xeon. They used to be called Conti One. These are the original old guard who were behind the Ryuk locker, which is the original Conti locker. So Xeon will provide like call center services because they're like amazing in callback phishing, probably like the most sophisticated group in callback phishing. They have this extremely talented pen testers who can get pretty much any network down, and they do experiment a lot with CVEs. So you have a group like that goes to Lockbit, and they will sometimes take Lockbit accesses, because Lockbit still had at that point, it's 2022, 2023, really good initial access brokers. And they will pretty much process, this is the word they use, process those accesses, meaning get into the network, get the data out, kill the backups, execute the locker, do all the things that require a lot of craft, the craft that Lockbit themselves didn't have. At this point, it's really interesting. Lockbit even develops the form of their locker called Lockbit Green, which is pretty much a form of Conti locker, because Conti and Lockbit lines of lockers are very different. But for the Conti operatives who are, working for Lockbit as this ghost group, they want to work with a locker that they're adjusted to. And it's amazing how Lockbit creates a special Lockbit locker for Conti. And that's when we have, and this correlates with the suspicion about the government affiliation. Xeon for sure was government affiliated. We know that from Conti leaks. even though at that point it wasn't called Xeon. And we know that from adversarial chatter, Xeon was approached by the government, by the FSB before right before the war, and they were experiencing a lot of hard pressure from the government. So, and we then could see that Lockbit is attacking in February, March. They're attacking the city of Auckland, and like 1 month after, Conti is attacking the city of Dallas. So like even the pattern of attacks is were similar. You could see it's pretty much the same people operating. And then what those people are getting from it is because Lockbit has such a brand. And Conti at this point lost the brand. Conti always also had like, you know, an a huge brand. But Conti lost the brand at that point. So, you know, instead of being Conti, they're now called like Royal or Black Suit. And like, you know, the victim asks, who are you? And they're saying, well, we're Black Suit. Like, who's Black Suit? It's very different from if you had someone for Lockbit, and now all this, you know, noise, all this heat created by Lockbit branding division, so to speak, they're now this heat is now working to pressure the victim into payment. And that was an extremely elegant and extremely smart model. And, you know, concluding this very long story, Takedown was, first of all, really, really effective because it hit the blog. And first of all, infrastructurally, hitting the blog is pretty much hitting the, you know, it's like with the vampires, you need to hit them in the heart. Like with ransomware groups of these days, like hitting the blog is hitting their heart because everything is dependent on blog. Communication between affiliates, encryption keys, communication with victims, the ability to force victims to pay by posting the data, branding, you know, all those things. Like the blog is the absolute center. If you kill the blog, you pretty much kill the group. They could technically, they could rebrand, they could put the blog back, but it will require amazing amount of efforts. So, but for Lockbit, even besides any ransomware group depend on the blog, Lockbit invested so much impact, so much, you know, money, force, people into pushing their blog, that when the blog is done, the brand is done. And for Lockbit, branding was like 70% of the success. And the remaining 30% were like former Conti people, which, yeah, will go somewhere, but like, why would they? If you think about it, like, you know, they could retire now. They probably don't want to go back to Conti, because if they wanted to stay with Conti, they would have stayed with Conti. The Xeon just would stay as Xeon and, like, you know, do their own blog. So they don't want to do that. And we know that because they joined Lockbit. And they want to be in Lockbit because of the Lockbit brand, which is now done. So realistically, I think there is a really good chance of those people just saying, like, enough of that. And final comment, like from a cultural standpoint, like the war was a huge change for that region, for Russians, for Ukrainians, even for Belarusians to some point. And many people, probably even majority of people, at least educated ones, they had like major value reassessment with their lives. And really this like, this entire narrative of, you know, get rich or die trying, it was extremely popular in like former Soviet countries before the war, because like money could get you everything. But after the war, the values are completely different. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if you have a Lamborghini or, like, you know, a good apartment. Like, it's in those societies, especially in Russia and Ukraine, it's new values. It's more about like being a patriot, being a soldier, you know, fighting for your motherland, especially in Ukraine. And like quite a few of those actors are ethnically Ukrainian. It's just a very different thing now. So I would imagine, even from an ethical standpoint, they just could retire at this point. And this is why I think this takedown is very successful.
Awesome. Awesome. That was a very good summary of that. I had a question on, I wanted to understand the structure of Lockbit. Like with Conti, we know it was more business-like, different groups. They had Conti One, pen testing group, and they had other groups. What was the group? What was the structure for Lockbit like? Was it similar to Conti, or was it more like working more with affiliates and contractors, things like that?
That's a great question. I would look at this as a sort of a nesting doll with which each layer has its own structure. The very core structure, which is the admin and the people he knows personally, the Locker developer, you know, the core members, that would be very corporate. It's more like mafia corporate in a sense that it's a structured entity where everyone knows each other online and have personal loyalty and personal connections. Then on the second layer, you have all those ghost groups or collective affiliates, which are working as, you know, those cyber infiltration teams. So it's not a single affiliate who will try to figure out things all by their own. It's a collective of like usually 4 people that know each other very well, and they may not necessarily know each other offline, but they will know each other working together. And that's one of the reasons why Conti was such a big deal. Conti, initially it was like 150 people before the dissolution. And those 150 people, they didn't work as like, you know, one big hive. They worked as like 10, 20, 50 small teams, each of which had its own chat, and they will focus on one victim, but through the full life cycle. So they would be the ones who would be looking for accesses, they would be the ones who would be processing this access, and quite often they would be the ones who will, you know, analyzing data. But then Conti got its own Intel division. That's another very interesting story. So those people know each other as co-workers through some collective. For Lockbit's case, it would be either Post-Conti or Black Cat. And that would be the second layer. And the third layer is the layer on the surface. These are people who would be working to promote Lockbit's brand. It would be people on social media. It would be people on Twitter. It would be people who would be engaging with journalists. A lot of them are using translation services, or like, you know, now ChatGPT, which I think actually played a big role here, using ChatGPT to communicate with journalists, researchers, just to keep this heat going. And that would be the third layer. They themselves wouldn't commit any high-profile attacks because they don't have talent for that, but they will create enough pressure for victims of those high-profile attacks committed by other divisions to be afraid enough to actually end up paying.
Wow, interesting. That's really interesting how this whole ecosystem operates.
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing. I feel like, you know, how correlations are pretty much turning into one organic ecosystem. I really like the term you used here.
Great. All right, that was great. So let's move on to Operation Kronos, a very, very successful coordinated operation that took down Lockbit. Can you brief us on how Operation Kronos operated and what was the scope and scale of that operation?
So obviously the only information we have is from the government itself, which makes sense. From what we know by this point is that they took down the blog and the rest of the infrastructure, and most importantly, as it usually goes with taking down the blog, they were able to obtain 1,000 decryption keys, which is really the main main achievement here, because these are the companies that were spared from paying a ransom from Lockbit themselves. And like, very important disclaimer, like, there is no real evidence that we could trust them. But from Lockbit itself, we know that allegedly their servers were not updated, their PHP servers were not updated, and that was the reason for you know, the feds being able to take them down. But I'm not sure. They may really be trying to just play down the sophistication with which the international law enforcement approached this operation. The really important thing here is that without the blog, a lot of affiliates will just get lost. Without the blog, a lot of affiliates who are more talented, as I said, they may just decide to retire, because it's really hard to start from scratch. And one thing that is very important about today's ransomware groups, they're here for like 5 years by now. They were building their brand for 5 years. They were building their teams for 5 years. And first of all, a lot of people just get tired. Secondly, a lot of them were successful enough to get enough money to retire. And thirdly, they they now need to start from scratch, put the blog again, put all this again, and it's really unclear if they would like to do that. So that is really another major achievement from the law enforcement here.
Great. So I was reading the Europol blog as well, and mentioned the Lockbit backend is totally taken over by the law enforcement agencies, which means all the information, like the personas of affiliates, is out there. So do you think there will be a follow-up action of who map from law enforcement mapping that more indictments on affiliates and kind of mapping the personas to the real people?
Yes, I really hope so, and I've seen some really good signs of that. Actually, speaking of good signs, the information that the National Crime Agency was able to obtain confirms that they were not deleting data after payments. So that is just an important sign point. But going back to indictments, we already see Lockbit being added to the OFAC list, which happens extremely rarely. The only other case that I know is Conti, which was affiliated with the government, with the Russian government. We know that from very different, very diverse sources. And I think this really corroborates this theory that they were actually indeed governed by the government, because it's just rare when the U.S. government puts someone on the AFAC list without a major reason. AFAC lists are extremely the diligence that they take to put someone there is insane. They are very cautious about not adding someone, about whom they're not 100% sure. And this is actually typical for Russian-speaking ransomware. Despite the stereotype, Russian-speaking ransomware doesn't really, work for the government or cooperate with the government that much. There are exceptions, and the classic one would be Conti. And the other one, as we probably will see soon, is Lockbit. So as soon as the government is more open about sharing what they know, I think we'll definitely see more indictments, and most importantly, more additions to the OFAC list. And OFAC list is really a game changer. Like if someone is in one way or another, even remotely close to OFAC list, no one will pay them. Like Western companies are extremely cautious about their sanctions due diligence. So we've seen that with Conti. Conti pretty much went out of business as a brand, not as a cybercrime threat, but as a brand, they went out of business because they were associated with a sanctioned entity, and that was pretty much their end. So I'm pretty sure the same thing would happen with Lockbit, and I'm pretty sure we will see more indictments exactly because of that.
Great. Now, I finally had $1 million question, which I think you touched upon. What is next for Lockbit? Which I think rebranding is a long shot. I don't, like you mentioned as well, I don't expect they recovering from this. But do you see them splintering into smaller groups like Conti did after the Conti leak?
Yeah, if I were them, I would probably just quit, because unlike Conti, which invested into talent, Lockbit invested more into the brand, and the brand is done. So it's not really clear what to do after that. I think quite a few of more talented affiliates will join some larger collectives. Xeon, who was one of the main providers for Lockbit, they are also working with Akira. So my recommendation would be look at the ISCs of Akira Ransomware, because probably the talent that was relocated, that will be relocated from Lockbit into Akira. The other one is Black Suit. Black Suit is essentially the direct heir of Conti, Conti 2, that's how they used to be called. Black Suit is one of the few large corporate ransomware groups that is relatively open to accepting new people. And Black Suit has been working pretty close. Well, their admin and the admin of Lockbit are in pretty good relationship. But one thing about Black Suit is they are extremely averse of working with the government. So if anything will suggest that Lockbit indeed was compromised, and I think pretty soon we will get actual proof of that from the law enforcement, then there is no way anyone who was affiliated with Lockbit could come even close to Black Suit. However, that opens them the third way, which is Blockbuster, probably the most sophisticated ransomware group these days, because Blockbuster is probably the most closest affiliated to the Russian government group ever existing within the ransomware domain. I'm not even sure we can call them ransomware. I think they're like more of an APT. Their work closed. There are rumors that they operate from the same physical space. They do have very, very telling time patterns when the entire team pretty much quits for the end of the day. They could take a vacation, like in a structured manner, exactly like, government offices or private companies are taking a vacation. And most importantly, they're extremely sophisticated and they're very focused on targeting government entities, particularly the entities within military industrial complex. So if Lockbit was indeed affiliated, I think some of the talented affiliates could find themselves like in Blockbuster's ranks. But in general, for the main crew, I would say they probably would quit, because it's impossible to rebuild a brand that took 4 years to be built. And keep in mind, like when they were building it, it was the golden age of ransomware. Now, like even committing an attack is really hard. Like 9 out of 10 attacks fail, and those who don't fail, they usually only go with data exfiltration, and companies stop paying for data exfiltration, which is understandable. First of all, because companies start to understand that unless it's something like absolutely horrendous, data publishing on someone's blog will not kill your business. You will have some regulatory issues, but like it really won't kill your business. Encryption could, but lockers are not working anymore. When first of all, they just malfunctions very often, and then the system on the defense just captures the encryption and stops it. Even in the cases when lockers do work, there is almost ubiquitous presence of backups right now. And unless you have really good, talented pen testers, you will not be able to reach backups. So, and like if one is hit and they have backups, they will be back in business like in a matter of like half a day if they have a good IR team on board. So lockers don't work, attacks don't really manifest that much. Data exfil, I think, will go on decline. Well, not data exfil itself. Payment for data exfil will go on decline, and clearly spreading the message that criminals will keep their data on their servers. That I think also will help a lot with just making sure no one pays. And like in this environment, I don't think that ransomware groups, at least like mid to low tier affiliates, would continue.
Great, great. This ties nicely into the last question which I had for you. How do you see this impacting the global ransomware landscape in the near term and in as well long term?
A year ago when the takedowns just started, the first one was Hive.
Yeah.
A year ago, I would say that groups would become more cautious. They would become more, thoughtful about their infrastructure, because that was what we saw with Hive. Like when Hive was taken down, Royal was closest to it, and Royal completely changed their operations. They desegregated their servers, they desegregated their operation. Like they became like 10 times more resilient than they were before Hive was taken down, because the head of Royal and the head of Hive knew each other pretty well. So he was really, the head of Royal was really up to the point, up to the date about what happened to Hive and how it happened to Hive. But then with everyone else, nothing changed. And fortunately, I think it's a great thing that the criminals are behaving the way they are. They're not learning, and that's amazing. That's amazing. So that would be one thing. So the lack of change here, hopeful lack of change, is also in a sense, an impact. Again, some talent would just move to more stable groups. I would take a close look at Akira. I would also think Akira would probably be the one that would be taken down next, simply because it's relatively large, but not kind of like too big to fall kind of group like the post-Conti ones. And then essentially, if Akira is down, There are some others like Play or Medusa, but like they're not that impactful. If Factory is down, really the remaining ones would be post-Conti, and that would be a completely different challenge. That would be a completely different war. It's like, shifting from a police operation to an actual military operation. I would like think about it this way, because these people are very well equipped. These people are very well educated. They know exactly how to build proper operational security. But after we get down Conti, I think we're pretty much done with ransomware. And I really hope for this day to come sooner than later.
Great, great. It was really nice talking to you, and I was really, it felt really good understanding the intricacies of Lockbit. And
Thank you. It was an amazing pleasure being here and talking.
thank you so much. Thank